And we also have a second award that we give to the project that took the top project in the area of clinical or translational science. And so this year I'm absolutely delighted to announce that the winner of this prize is Associate Professor Julia Marley. And Julia is actually not present, but she's sent a duo team to take her place, who I'll introduce in just one moment. The title of their project is the validation of algorithms for screening and detection of hyperglycemia in pregnancy in rural and remote Australia. So this is a project, an important project, and Julia herself is based in Broome, but it's a statewide project, and we've got the pleasure, I'm just trying to find, there we go, of Emma Jamieson, who is a PhD student who's working on this project based in Bunbury, who's come along to receive the award on Julia's behalf, and her team backup, Andrew Kirk, who is a GP obstetrician based in Bunbury as well, part of the rural, or leads the rural clinical school and part of this project as well. So it's lovely to see the DRWA reach going out into the community and to the rural and regional areas. And so absolute pleasure awarding this to you, or to Julia.
To Julia, yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Well done. And we've got some similar questions to address to Emma, with Andrew as a backup if we need, but I don't think we're going to need it. I had a chat to Emma beforehand and she's completely across what's going on here. So Emma, can you give us a brief overview of the research project? Just put it in perspective for those in the room.
Absolutely. Thank you. I should say Julia Marley is about this high, but she's got big shoes to fill, so there's two of us here to fill those today. So gestational diabetes is the most common problem encountered during pregnancy, and the high glucose levels that occur are mild. They're not as high as in overt diabetes, but they're still associated with babies growing larger than normal and all the complications associated with delivering a larger than normal baby. Now, all women are recommended to be screened for gestational diabetes during pregnancy using a glucose tolerance test. It's quite a difficult test to get women to do. They have to fast overnight, they have to drink a glucose challenge, which is actually the equivalent in sugar of 2 cans of Coke, so it's quite sweet. They then have to wait in a waiting room for 2 hours. And we have found through our study that only half of the women in rural and remote WA complete the test. And that's a real problem because they're actually at higher risk. We have higher levels of obesity in rural communities, and we have a higher proportion of Aboriginal women who are at a 1.5 times age standardised risk of developing GDM, or gestational diabetes. So we did a study called ORCID that looked at alternate tests that we could use. One of the tests was HbA1c, which you're very familiar with. Anyone in the audience who cares for someone with diabetes or has diabetes themselves would know it's a measure of your glucose levels over the past 3 months. So we measured HbA1c and also glycated albumin. Glycated albumin gives you a readout of your sugars over the past 3 weeks. It's not a test that's currently available in Australia. It is used elsewhere around the world, and we're hoping to bring it here. We chose these tests because they'd be easier to do. Women don't have to fast overnight, they don't have to drink the glucose drink, they don't have to sit in a waiting room for 2 hours, and they could do the test at any time during the day. So we looked at these tests and compared them to the glucose tolerance test and how many women were diagnosed. And we found that they were quite good at picking up women with gestational diabetes, but they tended to pick up different sort of subgroups within those women who had diabetes. So we thought if we can combine the tests together and group women at low, mid and high risk, could we use that instead of a glucose tolerance test? Now the answer is we can. The women in the high risk group were 2 times more likely to have an adverse birth outcome. However, what we did with our study was we relied on glucose tolerance tests collected as part of routine care out in the regional areas. And what we found during the study is the way we do the test here in Australia, we use tubes that aren't very good at stabilising glucose. So the glucose levels in the tubes drop over the first 4 hours. And most of our samples from our study arrived 5 hours after collection. So we estimate about 62% of the women who had gestational diabetes in our group, and we had 500, or just over 500 women who did the tests, about 62% of them who had GDM were actually told their sugar levels were normal. So going forward, the next step, and what we've now got funding to do, which we're very grateful for, is to compare these tests, but alongside a glucose tolerance test that's done using tubes that stabilise glucose. And these tubes are currently used in America and in Europe, so we're importing those, and we'll redo the study and validate those low and high cut points. Fantastic, there we go.
Thank you. That was a lovely overview. So I suppose you summarised it in your last couple of words, but perhaps you could wrap it up in one sentence for those in the room, what the ultimate hope of the project is in terms of the people in WA you're likely to benefit.
Okay. So obviously the picking up women with gestational diabetes means we can manage their sugar levels during pregnancy to avoid those adverse birth outcomes. One other benefit is picking up GDM in pregnancy is a window of opportunity for future treatment, for future prevention of type 2 diabetes. So there's programs in place that can help with that. Okay.
Great, thank you. And would it be right to say that this is likely to have the biggest impact on those in rural and remote communities who find it hard to get their OGTTs done?
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
so that's great. Now, I've met Emma before in a past life, or in her diabetes research life in the past, in a different space, so it might be interesting to ask her how long you've been working in diabetes research, and just tell the room a little bit about your journey there.
Sure. Okay, I've been in diabetes research for 18 years. I have a personal interest in diabetes research. I have type 1 diabetes, and you know, I remember as a young girl, I would read detective novels, Trixie Belden, Nancy Drew, loved all those. And after I was diagnosed, Mum said to me, you know what, being a scientist is a bit like being a detective. You know, perhaps you could look at why you got diabetes. And so from that point on, I was always interested in diabetes research. And so I've been really fortunate with the groups that I've worked with, and some of the people that I have worked with are in the audience today. I've worked over in Melbourne doing type 1 islet transplantation, worked with Grant Morahan here at Harry Perkins, and then when I moved down south, thought, oh, perhaps that's the end of my diabetes research career, and then stumbled across the Rural Clinical School. So I'm not sure if you want to talk a little bit to the RCS, but they're a fantastic group, and they do some great research which is directly translatable back into clinical practice. So.
Fantastic. Thank you. And obviously Emma's representing Julia, who can't be here today, but I think she'll be very proud of the way Emma has represented her award and the project. And I suppose I know it's not your team, and perhaps you can answer this through the eyes of Julia, because she probably gets you on the team, which is great from her perspective. How important to projects like this is it to get funding from groups like DRWA, local groups who recognise your local research?
It's extremely important, and I suppose I have to declare a conflict of interest here, because I will be benefiting directly from this award. We are very grateful. Research in rural areas is slightly different to, I suppose, a lab-based city research project. There's probably about 4 stages along the way where funding at each stage is really critical. You've got your community consultation early on. You can't get a project off the ground unless the community want that research to be done. So that's all part of the design of the project. then you actually have the project, then obviously the dissemination of the results and the translation. And then the last step is, right, now that we've made changes to clinical protocols, have they been implemented? Has that made an impact? And if you don't have funding at each of those steps along the way, the whole project can fall over. So it is absolutely vital.
Thank you. And Andrew, perhaps to wrap up, to come all the way from Bunbury, how important is it for the Rural Clinical School to be involved in projects? And we're excited to see you involved in diabetes projects, and hopefully that be ongoing. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Yes, it's extremely important for us. The Rural Clinical School is a small part of the medical faculty. We have about 100 students come through our program and 80 staff scattered around the state. We are truly distributed right across rural WA, and that's where all our activity is. And as well as teaching students, research is now becoming an important part of our activity, and it's one of the reasons we were set up, is to develop an evidence base around rural medicine. So we are very much on the fringe in terms of the action, but when we are thrilled that we can actually progress some of our projects, and this is critical to make that happen.
Great, thank you. So thank you to both Andrew and Emma. Congratulations. I think they want to take it over. Thank you.